Hello and welcome to the NVR Podcast number 19. I'm Rachael Aylmer.
And I'm Peter Jakob.
And today we're talking about love is not enough.
Yeah.
Big topic.
It is indeed. Just to mention, in the last podcast, we had some technical difficulties.
We did.
It was all my fault. I was touching connections on my laptop, so I'll make sure to sit on my hands this time so it doesn't happen.
Yeah, and then I had to make it in two parts. So any listeners may find podcast number 18 is A and part B. And I think at the end of part B, there's a bit of an abrupt ending.
Yeah.
Hey, technical issues.
Sorry about that, but I'll do better. So Rachael, this was your idea, this topic. And I was wondering whether you could share how this theme, love is not enough. Is it love is not enough or not always enough? How that emerged?
Is love enough? There's lots of ways to term it. It emerged in a conversation with my colleague just last week, actually. She's working with a client, and this client mentioned in a session their relationship with their daughter and their adopted daughter is turbulent, and there are changes in the relationship, and this mother is working really well with the approach in NVR and very committed. And she expressed that when she made her adoption, when she was going through those processes, that the love that she has for her child, for her adopted daughter, will be enough to eradicate any past, traumas, any difficulties in the attachment. That the mother's love would be enough. And in the session with my colleague, she expressed that she's coming to terms with the love hasn't been enough. The love is not enough. And there's so much more to deal with, so much more to challenge. And she also expressed a loss around that realization and some sadness, coupled with some helplessness. And we've been talking a lot about that in my work and my colleagues' work, to support parents through that process. That's how it came about.
I just suddenly remembered a film I watched recently, a new Western starring Tom Hanks and a young girl. I forget her name. And in this Western, Tom Hanks rides from town to town to read the news of the world to people out west. And he comes across this girl who lost her family twice. First, when her German settler family in Texas were killed by Kiowa Indians. And then she was adopted by the Kiowa and learned to love her Kiowa family. And then the Kiowa family were killed by American soldiers. And Tom Hanks finds her. And the story, I don't want to give a spoiler. The story is about, his growing love for her and hers for him, as a father figure, and meeting her needs. And I think it's a notion that we often have, and I think a notion that pervades some of the conversations that professionals also have with parents that if you love your child enough, if you for example, if you're attachment aware, if you're mindful of mirroring their affect, if you only hold them and provide that emotional containment, that is how they will heal. I think that particularly adoptive parents, foster carers, to some extent even residential carers in residential children's homes, can end up feeling quite guilty if that doesn't work. And I think that can present a real problem.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking of what you said about your colleagues' work with this family, the sort of realization that loving embrace is important. Maybe it's the foundation of all change, but that alone does not bring about change. With children who have had very, very serious and traumatic experiences, or indeed, I think with children who have not had those experiences and who have, for whatever reason, developed a control orientation, an orientation towards controlling others.
I think in society as well, we are led to believe love, you've heard the quotes, love conquers all. I've heard those quotes growing up, in magazines or radio, film. Love conquers all. Everything will be all right if the love is there, and the love is fluid and genuine and rich, and love will conquer all. And I guess not always. Not always, or at least all. I guess the question is, conquer all what? Because the parent can continue to love the child unconditionally throughout the child's upbringing, and that remains. That's steadfast. That's concrete. That's genuine. That's unconditional. But it's about the changing part, isn't it? As you just described. Yeah.
Well, and I'm thinking of Chaim Omer's concept of constructive fighting, as opposed to destructive fighting. Sometimes there's a role for the parent to engage in a struggle that takes place over time. I guess to me, the question is about that transition into a struggle, when love is not enough, or when something else is not enough, indeed. How does the parent, the caregiver, transition into a struggle for everyone? It's a struggle against the controlling orientation of the child, for the child, for the family, for themselves. How do they move into that? And I'm thinking of letting go of exactly what I have done so far, which to me seems to be really, really hard, because the more anxious I am as a parent, the more likely I am to cling on to what I have been doing and not to do things differently. And I will often do more of what I've been doing. Of course, that is a recipe for failure. And, parents come to us and they tell us that they are helpless, that they feel helpless. Yet in that feeling of helplessness, they often seem to sort of really hold on to what they've been doing. Some practitioners call that quote unquote resistance. And I like thinking of it in that way, because it would mean resistance of the parents against what the practitioner has to say, and the practitioner knows how to move forward. I don't see it that way. I think there's a real difficulty in stepping out of what I have been doing so far and taking on something new. And I've been discussing this particularly with my friend Dan Dahlberger as part of the whole process of change. Seems to be a point, or maybe several points, where parents do what I call embracing helplessness. So to acknowledge fully to oneself and to others what I have been doing so far has either not been functional, has not changed anything, or it has not been enough. Yeah, that doesn't mean I necessarily need to do so much more, but maybe I need to do some things differently. But to move into that place, I really need to embrace that helplessness. I need to fully acknowledge I am helpless. I'm thinking in for example, in 12-step programs, they call it surrender. It's a surrender. A surrender to the inevitability of needing to do something different. And I'm just curious, from the point of view of feeling, oh, if I just love my child, things will change, and then the realization that they don't. What did your colleagues, clients experience at that point when they came to the realization loving is not enough? Something different needs to happen.
I recall the conversation going in the way that the client felt sad and a sense of loss and grieving. Yeah. And I think as well that there's this, I was going to say that sense of helplessness, but also it doesn't mean that what you have been doing is wrong. And I think that also can contribute to that level of helplessness. I think as parents learn more about NVR and the approach and the changes that can have in relationships, there's that reflection on what parents might have been doing previously, and then that, oh, well, I wasn't doing that right. Or often parents might say to me in a session, I did this, but I don't know whether it's right. And there's something about that. There's not a right or a wrong. It's about what fits for you in the moment. And sometimes the outcome in the moment doesn't always achieve the one that you perhaps intended, but it doesn't mean you've done it wrong. I think there's so much parent blaming in our society, in our practice, in our, in our systems, that the parents aren't doing things right. They're not doing it well enough or good enough. And parents are already feeling quite wretched at times about trying to repair some of the deep-rooted, trauma that their young person might have experienced. It's not about doing it right or wrong. I think it's just about going with the flow and experiencing what you might have learned from that interaction with your young person in that moment. And young people will always pose a different complexity, a different dialogue, it's not the same all the time.
I couldn't agree more. There is no right and no wrong.
No.
There is only difference. And
we're talking just a minute, Peter, about essence. And my thoughts go with my clients and about when a connection's been made, however big or small that is, with you and your young person, your child, to really hold on to that connection, that that small nuance in his face or her face, or that little hold of a hand, or that little eye contact, or that part where the young person resisted in doing something that was going to be harmful, i.e. throw a toy at his sibling, or I don't know, leave the house when the parents have asked the child not to. How the parent has felt in that moment, it's about that. It's about holding on to, how did you feel when your child responded to you in that way? What were your strengths, do you think, in that moment? How do you think your child saw you in those little pockets of connection? And about getting parents to see that confidence in themselves, to see that strength that they have, and to just keep working on growing on that. It's not about getting this right or wrong. And I think when we deliver NVR in training, a lot of practitioners are afraid to begin the process for fear of getting it wrong. So I think it's an equal responsibility. Practitioners don't want to get it wrong, and parents who are using the approach don't want to get things wrong. It's okay. It's okay.
Rachel, can I ask you whether I have understood what you've just said correctly, or whether I'm placing it in the right place, putting it in the right place? The way I've just understood you is that what helps parents transition from what they have been doing to doing something different is acknowledging the strength, the resource, the care, the connection with their child in what they have been doing.
Yeah.
Rather than framing what they have been doing as wrong. And that with that acknowledgement, they're more likely to be able to move through that space of embracing helplessness.
Yeah, you always put it so beautifully, Peter.
No, I was just trying to sort of understand what you were saying, and I think that's really important. So rather than the message being, hey, you've been doing it wrong, the message is, you've been doing it well. And let's look at what you've been doing it well. And something different is also needed. So it's not an either or, it's a both and. And that can help people move and transition by accepting the helplessness of what they have been doing so far, that they are genuinely helpless and that something needs to be different, without a loss of confidence and feeling of self-worth as a parent. I'm really curious about something, because you mentioned your colleague's client at that point of transition, feeling sad.
Yeah.
And I wonder what loss she was grieving.
I'm sure my colleague would be able to give us more information if she were here, but what I recall the conversation was that the parent felt a sense of loss and grief about the relationship that she may have had with her daughter later. So this wasn't the role that I thought I was going to have. I thought my position as a mother to my daughter would be different at this stage. By now, the child's 11 or something.
So the loss is the loss of a kind of connection, a kind of loving relationship that I had envisioned would happen. And it hasn't happened. Not in that way, not at this stage. And there is sadness.
Yeah. Very real sadness. real sadness,
And perhaps this notion of acknowledging love is not enough, I need to do something differently, it goes hand in hand with such a sense of loss. And it's a whole different way of seeing it from thinking of the parent, quote unquote, again, showing resistance. We don't have a parent showing resistance. We have a parent who perhaps stands on the threshold of grief, of sadness. We need to be there to help them acknowledge that loss and the uncertainty. What do I do now? Which can be scary. I think there'd be feelings of anxiety at that point. And that's a whole different message from the message, oh, you did it wrong, you got to do something different. It's the message, you did it well. And
even when the outcomes appear to be maybe the words of a parent. I was just holding, as you were talking, Peter, I was holding in mind parents where the relationship with their child is broken down so much so that the young person has been removed from the family home and looked after. And I was thinking about that parent or those parents where that has happened, where that breakdown in relationship has taken place, whether that's temporary or permanent, or the sadness that parent must feel around standing back and watching that happen. And, I imagine the parent laying in bed that night thinking, what could I have done differently? How have we got to this stage? Yeah, I think love is not enough. When love is not enough, I just think it's such a massive arena to talk about for parents, position for parents to feel so wretched that the relationship with their loved one is broken down, whether that's your birth child or your adopted child, or if you're a foster carer. Just so sad. Yeah, I can imagine the real grief in a parent when they feel they've loved their child as much as they possibly can, but still the relationship doesn't look how they wanted it to look.
So what is the point at which hope can develop, can be generated in this process? What's the point where the parent can start feeling hopeful, can start feeling that doing something that from an NVR point of view, we could consider engaging in a struggle against the controlling orientation of the child, a struggle against the destructive behavior, a struggle for the relationship, a struggle for the parent's own self, a struggle for the siblings, a struggle for the relationship with their child. How does the hope then come in? Moving on from what can be sadness, what can be anxiety, what can be despair. I mean,
I think, sorry, Peter, butting in, I just think hope is the driver, isn't it? Hope for change. And I recall a parent I was working with last year whose young person was, her birth child was temporarily removed, and how that parent never gave up hope that her child will have this spell out of the family home to invest in what the child needed to help her overcome some of her anxieties. But the mother's hope to maintain her relationship while her child was living away from the family home, and two, her hope that the child will return. That hope was the drive for that mother, the hope that things will improve, that even if my child is living out of our home, I can still have a relationship with her. I am hopeful that we can overcome this. We can move past this. I'm hopeful things will improve. I'm hopeful that things will get better. That hope is the drive.
Well, the hope is the driver, but I'm wondering, at this point of transition, how does hope develop? How is it generated? How is it strengthened? Because to me, that would be the necessary next stage, from embracing helplessness, acknowledging love is not enough. What I've been doing is not enough. And going through that process of feeling uncertain, going through the process of feeling sad, going through the process even of experiencing despair, as I've experienced particularly in work with adult entrenched dependency, where parents sometimes feel, does that mean there will be no more relationship?
Yeah.
Where the relationship seemed to have been narrowed down to providing care for their adult child, which they're now withholding. There needs to be a point at which hope is generated, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around how that happens.
I think perhaps through change, through experiencing a shift, for the parent to experience a shift in the communication or relationship with the young person that leads them to be hopeful.
So the doing.
Yeah, the doing.
Taking a step in NVR, very carefully taking parents through, for example, an announcement. I'm thinking of a family I'm working with right now with an 8-year-old daughter. And the parents have felt very reluctant to make an announcement to her because they were worried that they were punishing her, delivering an announcement. And we had to look very, very carefully at the text of the announcement and the attitude that they wanted that text to convey, so that they felt they were holding her responsible for her action rather than holding her culpable, rather than being her judges for what she had done. And at the end of that conversation that we had, they realized that holding her daughter responsible rather than holding her culpable is a loving act. It is an act where they, by virtue of demanding the violence has to stop now, communicate, we believe that you can stop behaving in this way now. We believe that there are, to use the metaphor that Aylmer uses, that there are other voices in you which have not been heard or not have been heard very loudly, that you wish to connect, that you don't wish to do these things. And they sort of realized that that would be a loving act, and I think that gave them hope. You could see it in their demeanor and their body language, and they then decided to make the announcement. I'll be interested to hear what they experienced next time I meet with them.
Yeah. Yes. I just think as we come to a close for the podcast this week and my reflections and thoughts about this subject, I think I could talk for a really long time about the position of the parent when they feel that their love is not enough and that love can't conquer all. And there's something you struck me really, Peter, in your conversation was about that continued fight and the struggle against the control. And that brings me to the quote in the film Gandhi, that when he was talking to the support people, that he was recruiting them to fight against the anger, their anger, not to provoke it. I just think there's something really powerful in that statement, that this is a continued struggle, that it is a fight, so to speak, a peaceful fight, a non-violent fight. It is continual and it is a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's what struck me most about our conversation today.
And what I've taken from our conversation, among other things, is the real appreciation of the loss that parents experience when they move from one way of relating to their child to another.
Yeah. Okay.
And sadness and other feelings that can be associated with that. And our job to be there for the parents to understand that.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we managed to record the whole thing without cutting ourselves off or...
I sat on my hands throughout, Rachel.
Well done. Okay. Well, as always, we're really open to any emails from listeners who might want us to talk about a specific topic. I know that there has been a request to perhaps interview some parents and talk about their journey of NVR, so that might be coming up soon. Goodbye.
Bye.